Hey there, hang up and listen listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI and stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence.
Hey there, Hang Up listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI and stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence.
Hi, I'm Joel Anderson, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of July 22nd. On this week's show, we'll talk about the WNBA's wildly successful All-Star weekend, which fell just days after reports that the league is poised to sign a lucrative new media rights deal. We'll also talk about ESPN's list of the top 100 athletes in the world over the past 24 years, and then we'll talk about the new NPR podcast Tested with Rose Eveleth, who reported, hosted, and co-produced the series, which covers the 100-year history of sex testing in elite sports. I'm in Palo Alto. I'm Slate's three-time slow burn host, including Season 8's Becoming Justice Thomas and our emotional investment columnist. Stephen Fatsis is off today, but he's got a great excuse. He's currently competing in the 2024 Scrabble Players Championship in South Bend, Indiana. According to reports, which are actually Stephen's text, he apparently got off to a rough start while his daughter Chloe is looking like a real contender through the first couple days of competition. And with me from Washington, D.C. is Josh Levin. He's the author of the book, The Queen, and the host of the... Yeah, that's right. And host of the upcoming Slow Burn season on the rise of Fox News. He was also my most recent out-of-town guest here in Palo Alto, and I sort of miss him. Hello, Josh. Good to see you again.
It was so great to see you in your natural environment, aka a diner. When you said 3 times slow burn, for whatever reason, I thought you were going to say champion, which maybe that's just what you should what we should go with from now on. I like that. I like the sound of that.
I mean, we are the 2024 podcast of the year. I mean, it was a team effort. It's not just me, but that's a championship.
That's what you say when you're trying to sound humble.
Well, you don't think I really am? You think this is all act? Anyway, also with us this week is a senior contributor for CBC Sports up in Canada, and he's the author of the memoir, My Fighting Family, Borders and Bloodlines and the Battles That Made Us. I also blurbed it, by the way. You're probably going to be hearing a lot more from him in the coming months, and I hope you're prepared. It's our friend, Morgan Campbell. Welcome back, Morgan.
Man, it's always great to be here. Joel, you're a 3-time slow burn champion, reigning podcast of the year. Guys in the Anderson home, there are 4 seasons, winter, spring, summer, fall, and strap season, because Joel's coming home with the podcast belt. But yes, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, Morgan's going to be on a bunch in the next couple of months, as Joel said, and we're super excited. And you're going to be hearing like some interesting combinations. Like, are you like a Morgan Campbell, Joel Anderson, Josh Levin fan? Or you're Morgan Campbell, Joel Anderson, Stephen Fatsis fan? You know, mix and match, just your pleasure.
I promise we're not doing this just to confuse people either. It's just life is getting in the way for all of us. But we're excited to have Morgan in the mix here, especially if he's going to be talking me up like that. But some of that is, I'm sure, because I blurbed his excellent memoir. So
I will also say...
Wait, describe that memoir one more time, Joel.
Well, I mean, just excellent.
There we go.
Just very resonant. Anybody that has a family, you know, and a complicated family can relate to it, I promise. So it's very good.
And Joel's going to mention this in our Slate Plus promo in 1 second. But another reason we're excited to have Morgan is the Olympics starting this week. Some people tell me, and so we will be going wild over the Olympics, and especially track and field, baby.
You know it.
This will be a big track podcast over the next couple of weeks. So yeah, I hope y'all are prepared. Now, as always, we want to thank our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. And in this week's bonus episode, we'll be talking about whether it's time to already start panicking about the U.S. men's Olympic basketball team following their 1-point victory over South Sudan on Saturday. We're actually going to be doing a few more Olympic segments in the coming weeks, so make sure to watch out for that. And to hear that, you need to be a Slate Plus member. If you don't subscribe, there are 2 ways for you to hear it. You can either subscribe right now by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or you can visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. This weekend in Phoenix, the WNBA staged its showcase event between possibly the best national team program in Olympic history against a group of WNBA All-Stars who didn't make the Olympic roster. That latter group included Caitlin Clark, maybe you've heard of her, the superstar rookie from the Indiana Fever, and Arike Ogunbowale, who won All-Star Game MVP the last time this matchup happened in 2021. Months ago, Ogunbowale removed her name from the Team USA pool because of what she called politics and roster selection. And it was Ogunbowale who stole the show Saturday, scoring a WNBA All-Star Game record 34 points to earn MVP and lead Team WNBA to a 117-109 victory over Team USA. So, Morgan, the timing couldn't have been better for the game. And the game, if you know what I mean, given that the WNBA is reportedly on the cusp of signing a media rights deal worth about $200 million each year. So what was your big takeaway from Saturday night?
Let me lead with the silver lining for fans of USA basketball, and it's the fact that the WNBA All-Star team was also made up, as far as I could tell, all of American players. I can't, off the top of my head, identify any player that had a big impact on that game that was on the WNBA All-Star team that was from a country outside the United States. So if something similar had happened on the men's side, something similar could happen on the men's side. If you took Team USA and all the rest of the best players in the NBA who were not on Team USA, and it would be a bunch of guys from Canada, Slovenia, Serbia, wherever, then we would have another round of these discussions about whether or not the United States is losing its grip on basketball supremacy, very similar to the conversations they have here in Canada about hockey. But because this WNBA All-Star team was overwhelmingly American, but also overwhelmingly a lot younger than Team USA. Rest easy, Team USA fans. What it means is your B team is as good, if not better, than your A team. And in 4 years, your B team, when they get elevated to the A team, might be even better. So from that standpoint, for USA basketball fans, there's nothing to worry about. And if you're a stakeholder in the WNBA, like, this is what you want to see is a display of the depth of talent. Because if there was a huge drop off between the 12 best players and the next 12 players, then you got to deal with all these criticisms from people that don't watch a lot of WNBA, people that aren't really that invested in it in the first place, but have become invested because Caitlin Clark's playing, complaining to you about how this is, in fact, another minor league. You only got 144 players, but only 11 of them are good, blah, 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 blah. But clearly, that's not the case.
This was maybe the most relevant and interesting All-Star game in any sport in decades. Now, don't get me wrong. I didn't watch it. I still am opposed to All-Star games. I won't get out of bed for an All-Star game, but I did watch the highlights on YouTube and the extended highlights, not just the 2-minute or 30-second clips. But I think that it's a formula that works for the WNBA because, like Morgan said, it's a league that's so competitive at the top. It's the most difficult league to make a roster and maybe in the world. And then when you narrow that down to the Olympic roster, it's like the hardest thing within the hardest thing. And so it's both that there are great players, but also, as Arike Ogunbowale showed, there's a sense of having something to prove, which is the thing that is absent from every other All-Star game, right? There are no stakes. When baseball tried to do the home field advantage thing, if you win it, it's just it's a cheap gimmick. And you can impose stakes on anything, but you can tell as a fan if you care or if the players care. And in that case, they clearly didn't. And in this case, they clearly did. Arike Ogunbowale felt that she was unjustly left off the Olympic team in 2021, I think, which is why she pulled out this time. And she clearly had something to prove. And those 34 points that you mentioned, Joel, were all in the second half. I mean, in the highlights, which I watched thoroughly, she was on an incredible heater. I mean, it was amazing to watch. And without this kind of structure, without this league, without these sort of stakes, without the personal pettiness involved, it was just the perfect brew for just an amazing game.
Yeah, for the WNBA this year, they've had to have so many things line up to kind of go on the run they are. Like, you need a sort of a transformative player like Caitlin Clark to have had the senior year that she had, right? Go number one to a team in a region where she grew up and became a college star. And then start off slow to create sort of the drama, this build about like, hey, is she going to live up to the hype? And then you get to these, you get another rookie, a rival who's right there with her, right? And then she's flourishing right as we arrive at All-Star weekend and take a month-long break for the Olympics. And it's just like, well, man, like the WNBA, they didn't necessarily plan for it to be like this, for all these things to be sort of falling in line, but like they really benefited from it. And yeah, to your point, Josh, like it really is, I don't know, like they obviously don't have this All-Star game format all the time, but it's a real stroke of genius that they were able to pull it off when they did. Like it's a really good idea. Yeah. And you wish like other leagues could figure out another way. Like what sort of like other aggrieved group of athletes in a league would be good enough to put up against some of the best players and like figure out a way to make it work? Because I think like that's the thing, like, right, when people have something to prove or there's some stakes there, then like you can actually get this up. Like, and I mean, like it's just such a contrast to after the NBA's All-Star game weekend where Anthony Edwards was just like, I'm not going to be trying hard. Sorry.
Well, I had a question for you guys, or maybe Morgan, you can take this. Well, Two questions. Number one, the only thing that would have had more stakes would be if there was promotion and relegation. Yeah. If after the game, there was a requirement that you had to drop one, maybe up to two players from the Olympic team and promote somebody, but only if the WNBA team won. So we would immediately invoke that clause, and then on the court, they would need to announce who was getting dropped and who was getting added. But number two, I am curious if the NBA All-Star game, even in a non-Olympic year, if that could be a potential solution, if it was Team USA versus the world. The guys on the world team would definitely try. Maybe they wouldn't. I don't know, actually. I can't decide if that would create any competition. Yeah, Jokic would probably never try.
Yeah, also the guys on the world team are all going to be on somebody else's Olympic team, so you have a hard time getting them all together and have a hard time getting them all.
I'm saying like in a non-Olympic year.
Oh, in a non-Olympic year.
Could you do next year be like the USA basketball? Because I think that's the interesting thing, right? Is like in the Olympics, and we'll get into this maybe in the bonus segment, but like could Team USA, could this like amazing collection of talent, what would happen if they were playing against Giannis and Luka and Jokic? Joel thinks they would go down hard.
They fuck around and get cooked. Yeah.
Especially since the good American players, and we'll talk about this later, tend to be older. Like you look at the under 30s, it's a much more international group than, the 35 and overs. Now you're going to tell 40-year-old LeBron James that he has one more game on the calendar that he has to play 40 hard minutes. Like it's already hard enough for him to do what he's doing. So yeah, that format, Team USA is in a lot of trouble, at least until Cooper Flag blossoms.
Oh man, Cooper Flag. Well, yeah. So to that point, and actually let's kind of move because we were talking about at the top of the segment about the media rights deal, right? That the WNBA is going to be getting like, $200 million a year, which is a tremendous improvement. I think they're getting right now around, depending on which estimates you believe, 50 to 60 million a year through their broadcast rights deals now. Obviously, the funny thing to me though is that the executive director of the Players Union is like, that's not enough. Like they're still undervalued. Does that?
Well, that's what she should be saying, right? That's
right. But
you want somebody advocating for you.
Obviously, none of us are. We don't work in the TV industry or whatever. But like, 200 million sounds like. I don't know, man. That sounds pretty damn good. And again, I'm always kind of like, I thought the problem here was that like TV and cable networks or whatever, like and streaming networks, didn't have the money that we thought they were going to have. I'm just kind of curious, like, where's all this money coming from?
I think they always have the money to spend up front. Like the question is, do they ever get that money back? Like DAZN, the all sports streaming service that was supposed to be the Netflix of sports, but now that Netflix has gotten into sports, I guess Netflix is the Netflix of sports. But, they've been on the scene. If you're in Canada like I am, they've been on the scene since 2017. And I don't know if they've ever made money, but they just always have money to spend on rights, hoping it's going to come back in subscriptions. And the other thing that's happening is because there are so many streaming services, so many places to watch, but they all have a 24-hour clock to fill. So just everybody needs inventory. That's the one thing they're all lacking. And so they will pay a premium for it, especially if the NBA says, because this is what I'm not quite clear on. So the NBA, as they were negotiating with these rights holders, with these prospective rights holders, was the NBA also negotiating on behalf of the WNBA?
Yeah, they're all bound up together.
There we go. Yeah. And so if you are a potential rights holder, you will take inventory where you can get it. And if you got to pay what we think is a premium, but what the WNBA, what the PA says is not a big enough premium, but if you got to pay that premium to get more of that inventory, especially to keep the NBA happy, then that's what you're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this with Brian Curtis a couple of weeks ago, and I think the point that he made is that for these traditional networks and streamers, they both can't afford it and they can't afford not to, because live sports are the thing that moves the needle in this era of cord cutting. And we also had this discussion, would you bet on one of these places like Peacock that's losing just a crap ton of money? Or would you bet on the long-term survival of a thing like TNT, which is just running Charmed reruns? Always need to make sure to mention Charmed reruns whenever we talk about
R.I.P.
TNT.
Shannon Doherty.
Yeah, R.I.P. But look, Joel, I mean, no matter if 200 million is the right number, or if it should be 250, or if it should be 400, in terms of one of the biggest and most galling issues in the NBA, player salaries, it'll make a huge difference. It'll at least be a really positive step. And like I was saying, if you're the executive director of the Players Union, it's your job. It's your fiduciary responsibility to argue that you're not getting enough money for the players. Yeah. But the next Caitlin Clark, when this deal comes through, is not going to be making $76,000 in their rookie year.
Right. And I guess obviously the goal here too is not only to because there's a couple things here. One, the WNBA, probably of all the major professional sports leagues in this country, is probably the only one that has real growth opportunity right now, right? It feels like the NFL is just hey man, how about a 19th game? They're just well, we just give you more. we'll give you more.
How come they never argue that they should add a fifth quarter?
Well, I mean, we saw a Super Bowl with a fifth quarter. Look, those people were dying at the end of that game. But yeah, so so it seems like the WNBA has that, and they've got this player who, again, you don't want to attribute this bump to Caitlin Clark because that would be sort of absurd, but it's hard to deny that her emergence has coincided and partly has driven this increase in value in the WNBA. And so they've gotten really, really fortunate in that way, but it just doesn't, I don't know, maybe there's just nowhere else for them to put that money right there. And they're well, if we're going to bet on any sport to be there in 10 years from now, maybe the WNBA is that. Because again, baseball, they've kind of squeezed the juice out of all of those as much as they can so far. And this is it. This is one chance you can try to, tap into some new audiences, right?
No, that's a really good point, Joel. When you think about the other major league team sports, and not even team sports like boxing, MMA, whatever it is, how many of them are growing in the United States as opposed to staying steady, or if you're the NFL, you're pushing games to England, Germany, Brazil, places where people don't even think about American football because this market here is completely saturated. If you're the NFL, you are just grateful that one of the star players on the Super Bowl team was dating Taylor Swift, because that was one of your rare opportunities to introduce this sport to a group of people domestically who hadn't paid that much attention before. Whereas the WNBA, obviously, the starting size of their audience is smaller, but then, each of these gains means a lot more to them. A million extra viewers to the WNBA means a lot more than a million extra viewers would mean to the NFL. And the WNBA does not have to go to some country where they know no one cares about the sport and try to make people care about the sport in order to grow the sport.
All right, well, we'll put a pin on this for now. I'm sure we'll be talking about Caitlin Clark and the WNBA again at some point, right? But anyway, in the next segment, we're going to be talking about ESPN's top 100 list through the first 25 years of this century.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy. All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the more than 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Here's our expert, the technology futurist, Ian Kahn.
Hi, I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, as our company expands, so do our hiring efforts. How can AI help us attract top talent? Signed, Searching for Higher Power.
So, searching for higher power, one of the most daunting undertakings of an HR leader today is building a new team and finding and vetting new talent. This is a very time-consuming process and can take precious organizational resources. As a companion to the HR team, AI technology can be used to create job descriptions, analyze candidate resumes, and filter candidates into various pools based on experience, skills, or any other parameter. You can also use AI to match internal talent with positions available. Parameters for this can be set, rules can be set, that can all be done through the algorithm. There are so many things that we as humans could be not looking at that AI can do in a matter of seconds.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
In 1999, ESPN Sports Century Project ranked the top 100 North American athletes of the 20th century. At number 1 was Michael Jordan, followed by Babe Ruth, Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, and Wayne Gretzky to round out the top 5. The only woman in the top 10 was Babe Didrikson, the Olympic gold medalist in the 80-meter hurdles and javelin throw, who later became a Hall of Fame golfer. There were also 2 horses in those rankings, with Secretariat coming in at number 35 and Citation at number 97. Things were much different this time. This time, ESPN only chose from a pool of athletes from the past quarter century. They expanded their choices beyond North America, and this time, no horses on the list. The top 5, starting from number 1, are Michael Phelps, Serena Williams, Lionel Messi, LeBron James, and Tom Brady. Josh, when we talked about this offline last week, you mentioned that you had a strong opinion about Phelps going number 1. So please share with the rest of the class.
All right. Well, since we're talking about offline discussions, I'm going to out you for saying that you thought this discussion might be corny. Number 1, top 100 list, number 1 is the corniest thing you can do as an organization or a columnist. Number 2, talking about it is like corny squared. But
this is like the should Pete Rose go in the Hall of Fame conversation for the
No, I want to have a conversation about these conversations because I do think it's interesting. But before we get to meta, about Phelps going number 1. All right, if we're going to take this exercise seriously and think about who the greatest athlete is, I think, and we're going to get into this in our next segment talking about track and field, is that you have to think about access issues, right? Like, we don't know that Michael Phelps is the greatest swimmer in the world, much less the greatest athlete, because who the fuck swims? It's like there are so many countries in the world where people don't swim, don't have access to pools or whatever. He's like beat out 12 people who could I mean, I know there are lots of people in the DMV here who swim. It's like people are obsessed with swimming. But on the global scale, it's just like this guy is like not really being pushed or competed against by people in large enough numbers to say that he is the greatest athlete. By comparison, If you talk about, let's say, Mr. Messi or LeBron James, a lot of people playing soccer and basketball on this planet, very popular sports, played around the world. If we think that Lionel Messi is the greatest soccer player, which I think we do, it strikes me that like he's got to be, or he or LeBron, like whoever you think the best athletes are in the sports that have the most people playing them, I think I would feel most confident in saying they're the greatest athlete.
My beef with Michael Phelps has nothing to do with Michael Phelps specifically, but like you, has to do with swimming in the sense that swimmers can rack up.
Yes.
Because we do this because we have this debate too. Every 4 years is an Olympic year. So what's going to happen is Noah Lyles is going to win however many medals he wins. Let's say he wins 3. And they're going to compare him to some swimmer that won 6 or 7 medals. And they're going to say the swimmer's a greater Olympian than Noah Lyles. Even though, as you pointed out, Josh, there's the access. Everyone gets to run. Not everyone gets to swim. But just the events are so profoundly different, you cannot compare.
Do you think that Noah Lyles would win the 100 if he also had to run backwards?
Well, this is what I'm saying. You don't have
his
the
arms around.
Do karaoke, do a little side shuffle.
You don't have these odd distances.
Which track and field athlete in history do you think would be best at backwards running?
Usain Bolt.
Yeah, gotta say, yeah.
That's a boring answer, but probably accurate.
But this is my point. So if they'd had the 100-meter backwards run, Usain Bolt would have that many more gold medals. But, the reality of sprinting is it's too hard on your body and your central nervous system. You can't just throw people into these events the way you can in swimming. Now, my beef with the overall list, one, at the risk of falling into the trap that ESPN has set for us, because they said, even in the intro, let's start arguing. This is all they want to do, is get people arguing to fill that gap, between now and the Olympics, between now and the beginning of NFL training camps. But to your point, Joel, my problem with a lot of these lists, as a guy that follows all the mainstream North American sports, but is also into a couple of niche nerd sports, is, the track and field people and the boxing people don't get ranked high enough. Because this is just sort of great, but they don't really define great. Is it only what you do on the field in competition, or is it the impact you've had on the sports media landscape? Because like Floyd Mayweather at 25, regardless of what you feel about Floyd Mayweather, the thing that did not exist before Floyd Mayweather fought Oscar De La Hoya was the multi-part preview documentary series leading up to a singular event. And that started with Floyd Mayweather, Oscar De La Hoya, HBO 24/7. And so
you're saying like Floyd Mayweather is the origin of like Drive to Survive, or like
they all owe a debt of
really
gratitude to that first series, because people weren't really doing that before.
Interesting.
Then. And so we want to talk about people who have changed the sports industry. Like, even though Floyd was in a sport that Americans think is in decline, what he did on the court, obviously, in the ring, is obviously unsurpassed. But again, in terms of using, and this is before streaming. This is when, YouTube was growing. This is 2007. Certainly wasn't what it is now. But using the media, using like viral clips of him talking trash about his dad and Oscar De La Hoya. But just the idea that a serial documentary program could lead to one big event and make that big event even bigger. That's something they did. And so we're talking about people who have changed the sports industry. Like, that right there is glaring. But because he's a boxer, and we've decided that boxing is dying, we don't give him the type of credit that he would get if an NFL team had come up with that. Or like Formula One, Drive to Survive. Everyone wants their version of Drive to Survive, when really, again, the debt of gratitude goes to HBO 24/7.
I'm glad that you set in on Floyd Mayweather, because I had a note here about that. But so you can't say that you're going to do this list of all the global athletes over the past 25 years, and like, you don't have Elaine Thompson-Herah on there. Like, you've got Allison Felix at 63 over Elaine Thompson-Herah. Like, there's...
Yeah, you think if a Jamaican website made this about the greatest athletes in the world?
You can't, the only person who has done what she has done at the Olympics is Usain Bolt.
Yes.
Right? Like, she won the
back-to-back
100
and 200 meter doubles. And we were talking last time, like, that is much more difficult than Usain Bolt made it seem. And then that Elaine Thompson-Herah made it seem. That is next to impossible these days.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's so competitive. It's so hard, the scheduling and everything else. And you got the timing, like just in terms of your training, like the lineup for that to happen. For her to not make the list at all, bro, like you're already sort of cutting into the credibility of the list. And also, like, I promise this is just not football hate or anything else or Patriots hate, but like Tom Brady at number 5. I mean, look, throughout most of his career in the NFL, it wasn't quite settled whether or not he was the actual best quarterback in the NFL. Like, certainly early on, like he was just sort of additive to a really good Patriots roster.
Yes.
Right. And then he flourished and he got better. And then he won a Super Bowl. He tacked on another at the end of his career. But like, I'm not trying to deny his, what?
Yeah. The way that you just constructed that sentence made it sound like you think that Tom Brady won 3 Super Bowls.
Oh, no. I'm just saying obviously he, was it 6, right? It was 6.
He won a couple.
6 or 7.
Won a couple.
6. Yeah, I mean, but again, football is way too much of a team sport to credit that dude for that much of it. Like, obviously, he's one of the greatest quarterbacks that has ever played, but like to say number 5 all time on the list of athletes, I mean, at least in the last 24 years,
it was actually 7 Super Bowls, but at least one of them he was cheating, so we can just round it down to 6. I thought it interesting that they mentioned that there were no horses, but did not see fit to mention that there was a particular position on the football field that used to be a glamour position that some of us used to play in high school, 4 touchdowns in a game, that was not represented on this list at all. That was interesting. I would also say...
Adrian Peterson, huh? Damn.
Nobody who carried the rock. But looking back at the Sports Century list that had Jordan at the top, I thought the preamble for that was interesting and sort of reframes it in your mind a little bit. And it noted, I think correctly, that if the list had been made in 1990 for the greatest athletes of the 20th century, it's debatable whether Michael Jordan would have been on the list at all, much less at number 1, just given what he had accomplished. He might have been on it. Probably not, though, because he hadn't even made the finals at that point. I mean, like... Yeah,
my recollection at the time is that people had a lot more questions about him than anything else at that time, right?
Right. So you think of greatness over a century, even a quarter century, as something that accumulates over a longer stretch of time than 10 years. But Jordan went from, hypothetically off the list to being the best athlete of the century. I just found that interesting to think about how that works and how these things can be reframed in our mind so quickly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because athletes' careers don't last that long anyway, right? So, I mean, 10 years.
They last longer now than they used to, though. So, the time horizon might be a little bit longer now than it was when Jim Brown was playing or something like that.
Yes, but also, as Joel pointed out, I think you're putting more thought into this than anyone actually making the list put into this. This is just 100 big names. How do we put them in order? And again, that's part of making the list, right? Is having a recognizable name to American sports fans.
Can I ask you just about this as a columnist, Morgan? Because I think we've talked about this with other journalists, and we see this on most read lists, is that it's mock drafts, it's up-and-coming rookies, it's these lists that really do well. And I think it's probably certainly not because the writers find these to be the most rewarding or valuable pieces, but it's is there some value for you as a columnist in giving readers, watchers, listeners, material that they actually enjoy and want to read and talk about and debate in a barbershop way or just in their own minds? People clearly, on some level, we've enjoyed thinking about this or talking about it.
I sort of look at it the other way. I'm glad I treat this the same way I treat the minute by minute scoops. I'm glad there are people that do them so that I don't have to do them. Now, if you would ask me to do a few bios for the people on the list,
right,
that's one thing. But to sit here and ask me to rank 100 people, I would rather eat potato salad with raisins than sit here and think of a list of 100 people. That would break my brain.
Elaine Thompson, hurrah. Usain Bolt, Floyd Mayweather. All right, I'm going for a walk.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, they do have Shelley Ann Fraser-Price on here, Joel, number 77.
They do, and that is worth something. But I mean, I think these things are kind of cute. They're fun to talk about. I mean, I don't have that much of a beef with them, but it's just kind of funny to watch us all just sort of fall victim to it. I guess we should talk about it. And then again, it is kind of fun. When you just come across a little blurb of an athlete and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that person. I remember that time in their life. So it does kind of tap into the nostalgia bit, right? Like the last time you saw Charles Woodson play. Charles Woodson, who's number 100 on the list, by the way. So again, I love Charles Woodson. I don't know if I'd put him in the list. But, what we'll do then, maybe we'll put together our own slate, or hang up and listen top 100 list at some point. So
I'm really excited. You guys will split it up 50-50, and I'll just, I'll read it and just comment.
Yeah, Morgan, you didn't know that you had signed up, but this is your next assignment.
I'm ready.
In the next segment, we're going to talk with host Rose Eveleth, who recently reported, hosted, and co-produced NPR podcast Tested, which covers the 100-year history of sex testing in elite sports.
If there's one thing sports fans love as much as watching games, it's talking about them, especially the stats. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right. You could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on, or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Let's meet our expert.
Hi, I'm Ian Khan. I'm a technology futurist, speaker, and author, and I love to help organizations measure their current state of readiness for an AI-driven world. I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, our finance team is top-notch, but small. How can AI support them? Signed, Financially Drained.
Well, financially drained, a lot is happening in finance and AI, and the possibilities are endless. First of all, AI can help your finance team analyze massive amounts of financial data faster than any human or a team of people could do. Second, it can help perform functions on data through algorithms. This can connect different systems together and really simplify decision-making for your finance team. And last but not least, AI can help reduce the time needed for data to provide insights so that your leaders can make faster decisions.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
In the first episode of the podcast Tested, host Rose Eveleth says this: sports organizations have been on a century-long pursuit to find a singular foolproof exam or test that can determine without a doubt whether an athlete is female. And over they have failed, with disastrous, career-destroying results because of one very important fact. Sports are binary, but human bodies are not. I wanted to flag that here because it's a wonderfully concise explanation of one of the most complex issues in sports and really human society, a subject that's examined thoroughly and thoughtfully by Rose Eveleth in their multi-part podcast, the first 2 episodes of which are now available wherever you listen. As we say in the business, that podcast, again, is called Tested, and we're delighted to have Rose with us now. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm a big fan of the show, so I'm excited.
Well, we're a fan of yours, and your first episode I really loved. It focuses on Namibian sprinter Christine Boma. Who is she and why did you choose to begin with her story?
Yeah, so Christine Boma is, I think as of now still, when people hear this, the reigning silver medalist in the 200 meters. She won in Tokyo. And she is one of the athletes who is impacted by these policies around regulation of testosterone for certain women. And I wanted to start with her because in some ways she is the I don't want to say perfect example because it's not good necessarily, but in some ways she's kind of like the most famous current athlete who is being impacted by these regulations. She won in Tokyo. She is an absolute legend in Namibia. Everywhere you go, people are obsessed with her. You can't go anywhere without people asking for a photo in like the grocery store parking lot. You know, it was like kind of surreal actually to be there with her. It felt like traveling with an actual celebrity. Like everywhere you go, everyone's always trying to talk to her. But she's also faced with this really complicated choice. And she was one of the few athletes in my reporting who decided to actually try and take the medication and try and take the medical steps in this new era, and sort of following her as she tries to do that and also tries to then get back into elite competition just felt like kind of a place to start to give people an on-the-ground look at what that's like.
Not everybody facing this dilemma, this World Athletics testosterone dilemma, where World Athletics says to you, if you want to be a woman, you have to lower your testosterone to this line. And as you mentioned, Christine made the choice to take the drugs to comply with World Athletics, but a lot of other people have not. Do you know what like her thought process was in terms of deciding to take this medication as opposed to not doing it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's both a really easy choice and a really hard choice. Because on the one hand, this is a big decision. You're making a choice to take medications that you don't really know anything about, that really aren't for this, right? That might have side effects you're not aware of. You know, the World Medical Association has said that this is unethical. The doctor who's prescribing it is in a, pickle, kind of trying to do what the patient wants, what Christine wants, but also sort of balance medical ethics. But also, Christine, all she wants to do is run. This is her life. This is her career. This is her passion. This is her livelihood. She supports an entire family based on her running career. This is how, she lives. Her family lives in a really rural part of Namibia up on the border with Angola in a very small, very impoverished village. And she is the income for her whole family. And so if she says no and doesn't do this, that's it. Her income goes away. And so in some ways, it's a no-brainer because she has to keep running. I mean, in her mind, she just has to keep going, both for the love of the sport, but also for how she lives and how her family lives.
Rose, you mentioned that Christine is one of the few athletes you'd spoken to that had actually decided to go ahead and try to comply with the process here. So how many athletes did you speak with in this process? Like, how many did you get close enough to they could have been the Christine Boma of this series, right? But it just didn't finish out that way for whatever reason.
Yeah, so I've been reporting on this for a long time and working to gain the trust of women. So I've spoken with closely about six women, and then about 10 or 11 via like texting and just kind of like getting to know them. I know there are other women who I tried to connect with and sort of were like, I don't want to talk to the press. They've been the press has not been friendly to these women. And so it makes complete sense that they would be wary. And some of them, I think about 3 or 4 of them have decided to take the medication. A lot of them have said, no, I'm not going to do that. And sometimes it's not even really a choice for them. It's that they don't have the resources. Like, who would they go to ask, right? In the World Athletics regulations, they say, consult your doctor. A lot of these women don't have a primary care. They don't have a team doctor. they don't have these kinds of resources. Christine is lucky because her coach's wife just happens to be a doctor. And that's basically how she was able to do this. And he and his wife are now helping some of the other athletes who want to do this kind of figure out their treatment plans. And so I've been sort of traveling all over the world talking to folks, and some of them, we say they chose not to take them, but they also almost didn't because they didn't even really have when I asked them, they're like, how would I have no idea what that means. Like, how would I even do that?
I have a question in a second, but before we get too much further, I want to note that Morgan wrote a great column about Christine Boma and one of her Namibian teammates in 2021 was actually interviewed for this podcast. So just listen to what Rose and Morgan have to say here. And Joel and I, we're just kind of making noise. But the second episode gets into the long history of the sex testing process in sports. And you went to Lausanne to the Olympics headquarters, and just people should support projects like this that have this kind of deep reporting, first of all. But second, what is the thing that you discovered either in that Olympic archive or through newspaper research or whatever, just from back in the day that really stunned you or that helped you kind of deepen your understanding of the history of this subject?
I think I didn't really realize when I first started researching this many, many years ago, just how early on there were questions about women competing in track and field and whether they were really women. And this happens immediately, right? 1928 is the first year women are allowed to compete in track and field at the Olympics. And immediately you have people saying, nope, that's a man. That's a man. The woman who won silver in the 800 meters in 1928, there are all these newspaper articles about how she has, quote unquote, all the power of a halfback. She should play for the Chicago Bears. All of this stuff, which is also sort of surreal, you know, given you can see photos of these women and they just look like normal people, like compared to the athletes of today who are like cut, you know, and just like incredibly muscular. You look at these women and you're like, that looks like just a regular person going to the grocery store. Like there's nothing, you know, really all that striking about it. But the other thing I thought was really interesting and in some ways frustrating is actually the lack of information that you find when you go into these archives, right? I thought, okay, you guys have decided that these women need to be regulated. There need to be rules. 1936, is the first year there's a rule on the books that says, you know, we can pull aside women that look wrong in some way, and they're very vague, of course, about what that means, and we can examine them to make sure they're really women. And if you're going to put a rule on the books like that, I would have thought that you would have a pretty lengthy discussion about what that means, what that looks like, how it would work, what you would do, because it's a pretty big thing to say, I'm going to actually say that woman doesn't look like a woman and I'm going to take her into a room and I'm going to examine her, right? And so if you're going to put something like that in your rule book, I would think that you would talk about it a lot. And there really is not that. There is almost no sort of like deep discussion in the meeting minutes about this. You'll see meeting minutes, extensive meeting minutes about, you know, what the little agreement that you should have athletes sign, whether or not it's okay to ask them to like say that they've never consumed alcohol in their lives. And there's pages of letters and all of this stuff, like, you know, wind speed, like all of these things that are, you know, important parts of sports. But those get extensive conversations. And then there'll be like one line that says like, discussed, you know, gender verification passed. Like, and they just don't talk about it very much. And it was so shocking to me because I think when you think about history, at least for me, I like to believe that people are thoughtful and have these like, you know, really are like grappling with these questions in a really like, you know, deep and coherent way. And that's just not what's happening in the historical archive.
So Rose, you know, the top 2 episodes of this podcast also made clear that this latest round of gender verification hysteria was sort of set off by the emergence of Caster Semenya in 2009. So she hits the scene in 2009, and after a few false starts from World Athletics, by mid-2018, they've arrived at a set of rules regarding testosterone. And these rules say if you have X amount of testosterone, you can't do any event between the 400 and the mile, which coincidentally were the events that Caster Semenya these were the events that she excelled at. The 800 meters specifically, but she could run up to the mile, run down to the 400, do pretty well. My question is this. You tried to talk to World Athletics to get them to explain that round of testosterone rules and the latest round of testosterone rules. They did not want to talk to you. Now, what do you make of their silence on this topic?
They sent me one email that said, you know, we don't comment on specific cases. All we've ever cared about is protecting the female category, right? And that's sort of what they gave me. They don't talk to a lot of people. It's, you know, they're not particularly forthcoming. I think they don't feel as though they need to, right? And in some ways they don't. They make the rules for track and field. They can do kind of whatever they want, right? Like they don't have to explain themselves. They made the case in the Court of Arbitration for Sport that in fact, because they are sort of an independent, non-government, non-official body, they in fact don't technically have to abide by human rights law because it doesn't apply to them. Sebastian Coe has said, he's the current president of World Athletics, this is our sport. We make the rules for our sport and we can kind of do whatever we think is the best. And that is true, right? They can do that and they are doing that. I think that they don't feel the need necessarily to defend themselves. Like I said, in some ways they don't, right? They can just kind of make whatever rules they deem appropriate. I did speak off the record with a couple folks who are close with the World Athletics team to kind of understand their logic. And I've read every press release and every piece of archival document I could get my hands on to kind of try and understand their thinking. But yeah, I think that they operate in kind of this very strange liminal zone. They're not a government organization. They're not really beholden to UN human rights like declarations. They kind of exist. There's really no way to hold them accountable. You have to go to the Swiss court. It's very complicated.
Rose, we were talking about the history here, and even, you know, way beyond Caster Semenya. Part of episode 2 just goes into this very long, tortured history of sex testing. And I whenever I read about the Olympics and something bad has happened, I feel like Avery Brundage names always comes up.
Yes, that's so true.
He's always
there
doing
he
something
is.
terrible.
Yep.
So can you explain about his role in like how this got started?
Yeah, so Avery Brundage is really, he like pops up everywhere something bad happens. He's there somewhere. Yes, so Avery Brundage was an American sports official. He sort of made a lot of money through sort of construction and such, and then he was really into sports. And so he is responsible for many things, including he's really the force behind keeping the U.S. in the 1936 Olympics. He sort of really quashed all of the protests around not going to the Olympics that were hosted in Berlin, where Adolf Hitler, rides through the streets and is, it's really an expo for, the Aryan nation, et cetera. He also was very vocal about how he did not like women athletes. He did not like the look of them. He did not like watching women exert themselves. He was just not interested. And he thought it was annoying and kind of gross to have to watch women be on the track. So he is in the United States kind of the one who is supporting and encouraging various sex testing policies. He's also quite close with the Nazi sports doctor who is the one who really gets that rule, that 1936 rule on the books, Wilhelm Noll. So yes, Avery Brundage is really a boogeyman of many eras of sports. And he saved actually several letters that are in some ways the only and the most sort of like direct references to sex testing and to this question come from his archives, actually, because he saved letters that he got basically saying, these women are monstrosities, we should not allow them to compete. He was very clear about his opinions on that front.
I'm going to be the annoying person at the book reading and say I have a comment and a question, but
great, excellent.
I find it really interesting that in terms of these cases of differences of sexual development, that the real like locus of this is track and field. You don't really hear about this in basketball or soccer or tennis, and just like that these officials in this sport, and I'd be curious if folks want to have kind of conjecture about this, but like they've taken it upon themselves to like really police this when other sports seem to have been like, we just don't care and we're not going to be in the business of like deciding which women are actually women. So that's the comment. The question is, this is like a super thorny subject, and I'm just wondering if there's something that you changed your mind about or something that you don't necessarily agree with, but you felt like really challenged you in terms of the way that you think about the subject.
Yeah, I do actually have thoughts about why it's track and field. Because I had the same question where I was like, what is going on with track and field? Like, why are you guys so just like obsessed with this and have committed to it for almost 100 years? And I think there are a lot of things happening. I think the first is that in the early era of the modern Olympics, track and field was like the man sport. It was like the thing that you did if you were the most athletic. All the other sports were kind of like, if you couldn't make it in track and field, you went and did all your other. You did, tug of war, which was a real thing they had at the time, for one of the sports. Track and field was like, that's the man sport. And so as soon as you have women coming in, they're primed to be like, no, you can swim, you can do gymnastics, you can play tennis, but track and field, this is too much. So there's that going on. I think it's also easier to compare performance, right? It's one-on-one. You're just looking at times. And if you want to do a study, you can look at times and testosterone. Like you can look and just, it's much easier. Whereas on a soccer team, like how do you compare? It's much harder to actually kind of pinpoint what maybe makes somebody better or a team better. You also have, there's especially early on in track and field, and I think to this day still persists, a real class divide where it's fairly inexpensive to get into and you can do it. And you have lower class people who look different, who are more muscular, who have been working on farms and who have been, doing manual labor showing up. And that looks wrong to people. So I think there's like a lot of different layers to that question. In terms of what challenged me, I think that, one of the big things that we talked a lot about on this show is the show that I've made, Tested, and the women I'm following, they are all athletes that have sex variations of some kind. So these are not trans athletes. The intersection between this topic and trans inclusion in sports is thorny. A lot of the women I spoke with when I was sort of going around trying to kind of talk to them and gain their trust, they said, they were like, do not lump me in with trans athletes. I do not want to be part of this if this is also going to be about trans athletes. There's a lot of transphobia in a lot of the places that, I traveled to talk to these women, right? It's complicated. Also, in a very real way, some of these women come from places where being lumped in with the LGBTQIA community is actually life-threatening. Like Uganda has one of the most regressive laws around, queer and trans identity. Like you will suffer if you are lumped in with those folks. And there are athletes from Uganda who say, like, I can't talk to you if you're going to make it sound like I am one of those people. But then also I think that there's this really complicated and thorny question around the way we talk about particularly the modern era of like testosterone levels and advantage and who gets to compete. And there are lots of, I think, very well-meaning activists in the trans athlete space who will say things like, no, trans athletes don't have an advantage because they're suppressing their testosterone. And that totally throws, Christine Boma and all the other athletes who have naturally higher levels of testosterone under the bus. And so they'll say things like, we should just have a testosterone cap. That's fine. Because for many trans women, that is gender affirming care. They are already taking steps to lower their testosterone. That's not the case for Christine or Max or these athletes that I'm talking to. And so you have this like almost inadvertent tension between these two groups and sort of people saying something that I think they certainly don't realize actually kind of like messes things up for the other group. And I think it's tough and it's tricky to talk about this without kind of like backsliding into like the current sort of culture war about trans athletes in sports, but also even among people who I think really mean well, it's been really tricky to figure out how do you balance inclusion for both groups while also maintaining them as being separate people with different things going on, but with also some of the same questions of like who gets to be a woman in sports, right? Those are big questions that overlap. And so that was really tricky in trying to tell this story in a way that's responsible and also clear to the audience.
One thing you and I, Rose, have both noticed is that a disproportionate number of the people caught up by these rules, all the ones that I can think of, come from the global South. My question to you is, from your reporting, what role do you think race plays in the way these rules are constructed and enforced?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a huge question. I don't know. In the modern era of these policies, these eligibility policies, I am unaware of a single person impacted who is not a Black or brown woman from the global South. They may exist. It's possible. I do not know about them. Everyone I've talked to doesn't know about them. So, I don't know. I think there's a lot of things going on there. And World Athletics would say there's nothing about race in the rules. We say nothing about, any of that. So, and then think you might ask, well, then why? Like, what is going on here? I think it's a variety of things. We're not testing every woman. We're only testing women who seem suspicious in some way. And that is a combination of performance and appearance, right? That some women look like they should be tested and some don't. And that has huge racial components. There's also the fact that many of these athletes are born in situations that are different from where so in the global North, generally babies are born in hospitals in general on average, right? These are like broad strokes. And so many times if you are born with a variation in sex biology in the global North, you will be diagnosed as a young child because you go to checkups, you go to the doctor, and you could maybe get treatment. Now there's a growing debate about whether or not we should be treating some of these children and whether these are actually problems. But in the global South, that's not happening. And so kids who might have these variations know about them when they're young and potentially get treatment. And so they may be running now, white kids generally, may be running now, but they've already been sort of treated or intervened upon, as they say in the medical lingo. And so they are not going to be caught in this net of these policies. Whereas Christine Boma was not born in a hospital, right? And so these women generally are learning this thing about their biology because of these tests that are happening when they're 18, 19, 20 from sports. And so I think it's a lot of different things going on. And I think they all contribute. Now, I heard a really interesting theory, and I have no way to prove this, but I heard a really interesting theory recently that because there's been this movement to stop doing surgeries on intersex babies, for example, to try and kind of get them to conform to, one gender or sex presentation or another, and that there has been this growing movement to stop treating children with these variations because they don't need treatment necessarily, that we may see in 5 to 10 years a bunch of people from the global North coming into sports who have these variations. And that I will be very curious to see if that changes the conversation and how this conversation looks.
I hate you, Morgan, because you asked the question that I wanted to ask.
Sorry.
And it's such a good question. No, it's okay. No, it's fine. It's fine. He asked it better than I would have anyway. And I think, basically for me, Rose, I think that it sort of comes down to me, like listening to the first 2 episodes, is that it seems like the problem here, and we've already kind of covered this already, but that people are trying to put something into categories that just defies the idea of categories, right? Like, it's like they keep trying, we measure this, or we do it this way, or you run this way. And it's just like, you're always going to be fiddling with these little measurements or these categories because like human biology is just not that simple, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think I would say like you got to hand it to World Athletics. I'm pretty clear that I think they're not handling this the way that I think is, medically ethical or appropriate. But it is a hard problem, right? Like you've committed to you have men's sports and women's sports. And, in the like language of academics, like once you create a boundary, you have to enforce it. Right. And I think there are other ways you could think about enforcing this boundary. But it is a hard problem, right? Like it's not like I can walk in and be like, don't worry, guys, I figured it all out. Like, here's the perfect solution to this thing that we have. It's tough. It's tough. And, I think there's low hanging fruit on how we could be better and more just and more equitable and sort of more fair to these women. But it's not easy because we've committed to this way of categorizing the world, and the world is not quite so simple.
The podcast is Tested. The host is Rose Eveleth. We all really highly recommend it. We'll put a link on our show page. Rose, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So that's all for this episode, but we've also got a bonus episode that's live right now where we discuss the U.S. Olympic men's basketball team nearly losing as a 43-point favorite and why we're not panicked about it. To hear it, subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now. We'll see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to follow the show and to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Josh Levin and Morgan Campbell, I'm Joel Anderson. Remember Zelma Obadian. Thanks for listening.
Hey there, it is Ryan Seacrest with you. Do you want to make this summer unforgettable? Join me at Chumba Casino. It's this summer's hottest online destination. They are rolling out the red carpet with an amazing welcome offer just for you. So don't wait. Dive in now and play hundreds of social casino games for free. Your chance to redeem real prizes is just a spin away. Care to join me?
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.